Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill them! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
John.
Jim, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I guess it was quite a magical date, and I appreciate it, or at least a fortuitous astrological timing. I feel great. I hope you're feeling great. I know it's a heat wave. Apologize.
Yeah, I don't know if the precise purification moment of Jupiter is the perfect time to have chosen now on reflection, but we will see, I guess. I'm being purified by the fire outside as well as the metaphorical astrological fire.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that Jupiter also brings fire, because we discuss this a lot, how it is really about dialectical synthesis between Mars and Jupiter rather than the extremes of each. But Jupiter is just as active, you could say, as powerful, as potent as Mars is considered to be. It just wields it in a different way, and I think right now we're just, it's such a fucking interesting time to be alive. Anyways, but John, you have lived an interesting life. I'm sorry, I should have given you more of a concise introduction. I know you consider yourself just a student, but you're also like a Dharma student. You're also a student of meditation, and I think you came on to sort of weave, as Joshua would say, like weave a story.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm an astrology student, as you say, but I'm also literally right now having the 30th anniversary of becoming a monk, which I did when I was 20. Except it's an integral yoga path where we're literally not allowed to call ourselves monks. So there are rules or precepts that are monk-like, but we're supposed to live in the world, be normal, have a job, not wear strange clothes, and not develop a spiritual ego, I guess. So it's quote unquote monk, and almost nobody who knows me knows this about me, because I live a normal life. I'm just not partying, drinking, having girlfriends, etc. People think I'm gay. But yeah, I've been doing that for 30 years.
So a lot of what you said actually does apply to my life, but I actually live in the world, not a monk. And I just hold to a higher order kind of certain things.
This perhaps is the new teaching for the current era, or the era to come, spirituality in the world. I'm not necessarily saying that my teacher or my lineage has the only way, but perhaps in a kind of aeonic sense, that's where we're heading, and that's the teaching that is emerging. That spirituality isn't only for caves or monasteries, but it's for the here and now and for everybody.
Well, just to jump right in, this is something that you have discussed many times publicly, like with us, and also with me privately, is this kind of dissolution of Saturn through Neptune. And then we kind of retooled last week. We kind of were from day to record, and we were like, you were kind of doubting yourself, and you were saying maybe it's not quite like that. But I think your first inclination was correct. Neptune does corrode Saturn, but it's a mutually destructive relationship. As it's corroding, Saturn is also gathering the aggregates, bringing things into gravity, bringing things into mass.
Right, and I've been getting some pushback from some other astrologers, and of course that's the way it is. People have different ideas, but we're really close to an almost Saturn-Neptune conjunction right now. I think they're already under a degree apart. And then the actual conjunction is going to be mid-February next year. And the last time that happened, the Berlin Wall fell 6 days later. So it looks like Saturnian structures and systems of the past and power structures, what have you, might be about to crumble and potentially be reborn. But then further underscoring that, this conjunction is going to happen at 0 degrees of the natural, 0 degrees Aries of the natural zodiac. And I know Dan Waits, who talks about this a lot on his World Astrology Report forecast, which are excellent, by the way. He thinks this hasn't actually happened before, or at least not for the last 6,000 years. So, I mean, a symbolic breaking down, rebirth, born again moment potentially at 0 degrees of the world's zodiac is suggestive of I guess what we're living right now, the world appearing to crumble before our eyes, and maybe something new emerging amidst that.
Well, you know that I believe this, John, what you just said. So it's not, even though yes, we're saying it's a speculative episode. It's a speculative episode, absolutely. But I do also believe in what you're saying. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, we have discussed at length sort of the negative qualities of Neptune or negative qualities of Ketu, if you want to liken it to, I'm very fond of likening it to that sort of like, well, there's the saying, right? Ramos says it. It's Saturn, or Rahu pretends to be Saturn and Ketu pretends to be Mars. But there's an inherent relationship between Mars and Neptune, just as there's an inherent relationship between Saturn and Jupiter. So there's a kind of, as I said, it's mutually co-destructive, you could say. It's very similar to some narratives that we're seeing in the news right now, in fact, mutual co-destruction. So,
yeah.
But I agree, and I think this is like if you want me to get really esoteric right away, I'll say I think it's like the 0 degrees. That's very significant. That's like a rebirth. That's like it's the logna.
Yeah, exactly. It's 0 degrees of the world zodiac. It's, I mean, how much more symbolic of a new era or a new aeon could you get? And it's also, it's not just Saturn and Neptune, it's all the outer planets at once, all having changed signs within a year or two, and forming, as astrologer of Syncopic, who I'm learning from, just coined the other month, a flying wedge, a collection of sextiles and trines of Pluto and Aquarius, in the early degrees of Aquarius, Neptune and Saturn in the early degrees of Aries, and then coming next week, Uranus in the early degrees of Gemini, and temporarily Jupiter in Cancer. These are all going to be aligned, and the outer planets, those 3 outer planets will be aligned for the next 7 years.
I mean, it's very astrologically significant. I think this is like we're living in one of probably the most profound moment, in my opinion. I mean, obviously, I haven't been alive. We've had rebirth. Okay, yes, obviously, but I mean, in terms of my actual experience on this material plane, I haven't lived in other. I don't have like vast memories of thousands of years of the cosmos. Is what I'm saying. So for me, it's all speculative, right?
But tiny memory, you have a few.
Well, we can discuss this sometime. We definitely can discuss. I do actually have some, I guess, past life memories, but it's not what people think. It's not like, I wasn't like a royalty. It wasn't like, it's never like that at least for me. And it's not, I just take it conceptually, like things I might remember. Sure. Like, yeah, we're reborn. That's not a big deal to me. Like, I know that.
Sorry. Yeah,
No,
that's the way to do it, of course. It doesn't really matter who or what in a way. It's to take it conceptually, to use it as a tool, because it's the shape of the past that's informing the present, and it doesn't really matter what the name was or the location or the fame or otherwise, but more the themes that are still informing the present. As I'm sure you know.
I was actually going to make a joke. I've been thinking about this all day. You are kind of the chart collector. That's what that's what Ram and I call you secretly, because you kind of look at everyone's charts. You kind of see in a way, you can kind of look at all of our karmas too, in a way. So it is interesting and kind of
and,
like intimidating a little.
and bound to no, I mean, and bound to silence, right? I mean, if I ever use that information improperly or in a non-ethical way, I mean, that's basically your end. The end of you is an astrologer.
I'll say that you've never betrayed anyone's, as far as I know. Never. You've always been the most upright
It's
and
a bit
uptight
qualified.
with it. So let me just say that. Well, you know, just because I've had other astrologers on the show, so I can't make the, you know, it's like it's with you, I'm happy to co-sign you and say, please you know, go pay John to, you know, give you a chart reading.
I very much appreciate that. Shall I explain a little bit how somebody with 5 Libra placements ended up becoming a monk, or quote unquote monk, when it was the last thing I was intending? It all started essentially with Atlantis. I got a complete rabid fascination, obsession with the lost continent of Atlantis when I was about 11. Just basically, I was actually a Charles Berlitz book, you know, kind of a trashy paperback that was comparing world cultures and trying to make the case for there having been an Atlantis, you know, the kind of stuff that Graham Hancock does, or Forerunner, the kind of stuff that Graham Hancock does. And it was an incredibly frustrating thing to be into because there's almost no sources, and most of the sources that there are, you know, a bit dodgy or channeled or possibly made up. There's, you know, virtually, I mean, any archaeological evidence is extremely tenuous, if there is any at all. But a lot of that actually happened a couple of times. Again, when I was 14, I revisited those books, and each time I did, they would mention Edgar Casey, but Edgar Casey I'd look for him in the library, and he was always missing. Like the books were stolen. There were copies listed, but you could never find them. So my first year of university, a few years when I was 18, and there's a whole story in between of being a miserable teen, and you know, which actually is obviously not very unique. But this idea pops into my head: why don't you
Wait? Let me just ask you something, John. Did you call it uni?
I thought I meant to say university.
No, you did say university. I'm asking you if you actually do call it uni.
No, I just like that. But that is the slang in New Zealand, uni.
I'm just teasing you. Honestly, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to derail. Please go ahead.
So I get this, you know, basically an intuition. Why don't you go and look for this Edgar Casey book, which, you know, I hadn't thought about for years and years. And so I do. And what do you know? The library's now stocked with like a dozen books or something. And so I read every book I could find Edgar Casey, and I was completely blown away because he reconciles, you know, kind of skepticism and rationality with utter, total, almost unbelievable woo-woo in kind of a way that you can verify. You know, I don't know if you've heard about some of the life readings he would, or soul readings, I think he would call them, that he would give, where he would describe what was on the wall, all the details of the room, the bed, where the bed was made, the brand name underneath the mattress. He could, you know, just completely roll off all the details that were asked of him, answer any question, which quickly went from medical questions to the purpose of the soul and the reincarnation. And so, what
can you give a little outline of what his beliefs are? I'm sorry, John. Just so for people, like even for me, I'm not even quite familiar enough to say I could repeat the contours.
So, first of all, he was, I think, a Southern Baptist, or I mean, from Kentucky, you know, kind of conservative Christian whose only goal in life was to be a preacher and read the Bible cover to cover every year. And then, completely by accident, when he lost his voice, and a passing hypnotist, a guy passing through the town, hypnotized him, and it was suddenly his voice came back in a trance state. He started giving instructions on how to how to basically had a blood flow blockage in the neck, and to do this treatment, and to put pressure here, and to use, you know, this thing, and sure enough, the voice came back. But the point is that his beliefs were, from that point on, started to be radically changed by the information that would come through in his, trance or self-hypnosis state. So he couldn't remember what he said when he was in that state, but he'd wake up and there'd be a transcription that a stenographer had taken down, and it'd be saying all these Eastern religion type concepts and astrology and Jesus having lived in India and things like this that completely didn't at all gel with any of his waking beliefs. And so his beliefs became the information that he was channeling. And it was a kind of a lifelong journey of going from kind of conservative Southern Christianity to, well, basically the New Age movement. He's more or less the founder of the modern New Age movement.
So this is really interesting to me, and it's probably not a question you might know. You always surprise me with how much you know, so maybe I shouldn't put a preconception on it.
Thank you.
But do you know if he had a kind of Martinist family background? Like, do you know who his family was and where they came from in the original colonies or Europe even?
No, I don't. Sorry, no.
It's just because I'm very interested in this idea that a lot of the early American magicians, not just Joseph Smith, but of course he's like a great example. They all have this kind of roots in Salem and the 13 original colonies, maybe more broadly.
Mm.
And a lot of them are actually the descendants of French Huguenots. And so when you said he's a Southern Baptist, well, that's very interesting to me because a lot of the Martinists also eventually became Southern Baptists as well. So I'm just trying to explore that connection, but I apologize, John. Please go ahead.
No problem at all. So, I mean, the relevant part to my story is that he did a series fairly early on in this, because he quickly started doing life readings for people, 2 a day for the rest of his life. And fairly early on, somebody asked him, well, they formed a study group called the Search for God, based on the kind of spiritual guidelines that were coming down through the fairly basic spiritual guidelines like meditation and stuff. But in there, somebody asked, what is the meaning of life? And his answer was to realize God. And then how does one do that? By meditation. And then he gave some very simple instructions or guidelines for meditation, just basically body scanning and equal parts breathing. And so I thought to myself, well, if that's the meaning of life, then I'm going to start meditating. And I obviously need to try and realize God. So I taught myself to meditate, and that's kind of how the journey started.
Well, this is the thing, and it's okay. So I believe meditation is first and last, meaning that you can know all the magical, all the other stuff, all the other great. That's great. You know how to do this and this, but if you can't do it, if you can't sit down, if you can't, I'm not saying you have to do recitation, although I do think there's a certain metaphysical potency that engenders, you could say. But I know that Vipassana, I know you're more of a Vipassana bro, at least in your history, more recent history. And so I'm not going to say that that's not also useful, because obviously it is. So meditation for me is foundational, it's primary, and it is always the path. So I just want to say that. So you're totally that's the path. You can meditate. That's it.
And perhaps also just to give it some context, this was mid-90s, early 90s New Zealand, where nobody meditated. There was one meditation center in my city. I think it was called Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, and they all seemed like kind of strange white guys doing Buddhist meditation. I wasn't quite sure if that was what I wanted to do. So it was a very, nobody knew what it was. When I said, if you mentioned meditation to people, they either wondered if you're in a cult or, mind control or communicating with demons, or they just knew nothing about it. It was all very strange. And so, kind of an integral part of the story around the same time, being in uni rather than university, I was living with a roommate who was getting into acid, LSD, and for some reason at the time it seemed like a good idea to combine meditation with kind of tripping to try and uncover, to explore the subconscious and using it as a meditation aid. And I did that a number of times, had some really out there experiences. Also started to get some really strong warnings to stop, and didn't, and completely fried my subtle body. And with algo on the rising, the fixed star of decapitations, I essentially, in a way, self-decapitated myself, and couldn't from that point on. So I didn't come down from it. I'm like a cautionary tale for hallucinogens. I didn't come down from the last trip I took, and then it was like a hole in my head with like the window of a car wound down with the wind coming in when it should be quiet. And then my focus started to go, and concentration. I couldn't really meditate anymore, and that's basically the ABC version of that's how I ended up becoming a monk, because I basically forced into it. If you've got a spiritual problem, you have to look for a spiritual solution.
So I'm of the school, John. You won't be surprised to hear me say this, but I'm of the school that all problems are spiritual problems, really, and whether they can be amended in this life or not is a different question. But the only way to do it is through these methods, you could say. These like kind of looking internal starts with, it definitely is meditative, and it is you have to know how to do different kinds of meditation. You have to be flexible in your system, but this is really the root of it, is like to solve like a lot of the issues that people think they have. I think this is like at least the genesis, if not the solution.
100%. And of course, in the bigger scheme of things, it was perhaps a form of compassion to be forced to do something that I otherwise wouldn't necessarily have wanted to do, or certainly not so strictly or seriously, that ultimately was for my own benefit. And presumably also, well, not presumably, because I've kind of had some glimpses, I mean, very clearly burning off some fairly intense karmas from the past. And so, yeah, and around that time, I had a dream that I had an arranged marriage to an Indian girl, and she was, like Indian style, and the ceremony was over, and I was being led down a path firmly with her walking ahead, and I was really not happy about it. It's like, what the hell? I don't even believe in arranged marriage. I'm not into Indian spirituality. What the hell is this? And yeah, that's the way it happened. A few months later, a new meditation center opened in my hometown, and I kind of got the sense that I read up on it, and the teacher was supposed to be a teacher who was a former student of Sri Aurobindo, was realized, and according to the Kakasi material, one should look to have a realized teacher if possible. So I was like, okay, well that checks the boxes. I'm doing it, and so that's how the quote unquote monk part of my life began.
Well, thank you for sharing that, John. I've obviously never even heard that story before, because you're very private, which I totally respect. But you also tease me with all these like little Easter eggs of like all these cool things that you have done in your life. So you became a monk, and then what comes next?
And then I still am in a way. Well, and then there was, so the teacher was based in New York, and essentially then there was 13 years of going back and forth from New Zealand to meditation retreats in New York and elsewhere, because basically if you have a teacher, you definitely want to spend whatever amount of time with them you can, or a meditation teacher I should say, and if they're realized, I mean, the theory is that they can literally absolve your karma and expedite your progress. So you basically I made that the priority of my life. And although I had jobs, I started as a postman, and then quickly thinking it would be like an honest physical, hard, Shudra style karma yoga, honest way of working, and quickly got the sort of inner feeling, so to speak, that no, you should try and learn design, and that actually led to a career in design. But anyway, I basically all my work went into earning the money to go on retreats 2 or 3 times a year. That continued for 13 years, and then the teacher passed, and that was basically then a new chapter started from then.
Okay, so let's just bookmark that for 1 second. I just want you to explain for people who are unaware how much it costs. You don't have to say any numbers, but just give a idea for the expense of a modern day kind of spiritual student slash monk who has to pay for his own retreats and all of that. I think people don't know is why I'm asking.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I had never had any spare money. I remember at one point it was, and this is 20 years ago or more. You need to be saving $250 every week just to be able to do these retreats and trips. And certainly my postman days, or postie to be gender neutral, that was all my money going out the door. I had nothing left over. And then when I made more money, I just went on more retreats.
Would you say that your return on investment was worth it? Or are you taking more of that dharmic model where all experiences like help blossom our garden or whatever, or blossom our lotus?
No, I mean, it was absolutely perfect, absolutely worth it. I mean, you see my chart. I have some very difficult placements, and that's that equated to a number of kind of personal imperfections and challenges that I was basically working on full time. That's what you do as a monk. It's not escaping from the world and having a blissful, easy life. It's actually really, really hard work, and your weaknesses get thrown in your face to be worked on and transformed, hopefully.
It's this is the thing, John, is that I do think that the aeonic cycle is about it's the aeon of the householder, you could even say. But I think that a lot of, especially Buddhist tantra. So I know we talked a lot about other kinds of tantra sometimes, but I think specifically Buddhist tantra, the greatest masters, the greatest, aside from a few like Tsongkhapa and others, and obviously Jumi Palmer Rinpoche. But most of them were householders. You look at Padmasambhava, householder. That doesn't mean he lived like the normative life or like Naropa or any of them. I think that the monastery is good for preservation, but of
And
ideas and texts.
I think we talked about this before, right? But not since we started recording. That I mean, this was a yoga in everyday life path. There was no monastery. Virtually no permanent structures anywhere. Just rented halls and guys living together in an apartment. No in the city or whatever, just like living like regular people. You were supposed to have a job. There were no people sitting around reading texts all day or working full time for the meditation center. There wasn't even the funds for that sort of thing. It was literally just people doing retreats and putting on meditation classes for the public for free. Basically what we did full time. And then also it wasn't strictly monastic in the sense that there were also households. The commitment you had to make when you joined was to either be married or single as such. And since I was single, then I stayed that way. It was, if I joined with a partner, I would have then been a householder as such.
But even the way you do it, you're still maneuvering the same path, just in a little different way. Right? Like it's the same. You're starting off at the same, if you want to call it a Sephira, you're starting out at Malkuth, you're starting out in the kingdom, you're starting out where you should be. And even when you're saying like, it's a bunch of people sometimes living together in these apartments in the city, like that also speaks to that same conceptual idea, is that it is founded very much in the material world. That's not negative. That's a big problem that I have with a lot of people who talk about aeonic cycles, is they tend to put it in this body kind of antibody Gnostic frame. And I'm very Maya positive, you could say, Maya paused. So for me, I think it's because it also reflects the beauty of the garden where we live. Oh, it can. Right?
Yeah, and so it was very much that kind of way of approaching things. Explicitly that the time of monasteries and monks and nuns is over, that spirituality needs to be in the everyday world. The world desperately needs inner peace. Everybody, we have material riches, but we're inwardly poor. And that there's no, it's not, although the world seems incredibly chaotic right now, it's not as chaotic as it used to be. There's not as much war. You're not going to be randomly killed by a bike if you walk out the front door at the wrong time of day or something, probably. So, it is perhaps the right aeon for everybody to be practicing spirituality. And as such, the main thing that we did, at least, and I know the pastoral movement does similar, is we're trying to teach people to meditate as many as possible and for free, just to make the world more peaceful that way.
It's so interesting because this obviously, corresponds to the idea that to find what peace really is really a process of internality rather than some external thing like countries at war or at peace. Like, that is meaningless, absolutely meaningless, if you do not know what that is inside of yourself. Peace and war are really dialectical forces, and they should be brought into synthesis rather than this is something I've come to, John, a realization I've come to, John, just being like totally very frank, as I usually am. Being anti-war, saying anti-war, you're kind of negating something that is, you could say, a cosmic part of the cosmic process or cosmic cycle or the Leela or whatever you want to call it. And so the only way to rectify it is in yourself. So rather than like saying, I want this place to go to war with this place or this place to make peace with this place, it's just like rectified in yourself, and then the people won't be so discordant around you.
I mean, this is like that was, of course, that was 100% the approach of the path I was on. And there's the famous story about Sri Aurobindo meeting the son of Gandhi and saying to him, so what would you do with your nonviolent principles if the Afghans invaded India? At which point the son of Gandhi had nothing to say and went away. We all have the planet Mars, we all have the planet Saturn, we have malefics in our nature, and war, obviously, I mean, this is sort of a thing of our perhaps arguably plutonic extreme binary age where people seem to have lost the art of nuance, where of course there's a place for war. We want to avoid it. It's a last resort. But if someone attacks you, you do need to defend yourself. They've always been soldiers and martial people for that reason.
You're 100% correct. That's what's so interesting about your kind of quote unquote speculative monkhood. I'm not saying your monkhood is speculative. I'm saying we're saying it's speculative. But that sort of bachelorhood can also be very Geveratic. It can be a way to navigate that soldier's archetype without being a soldier. This is a more tantric idea. People are probably like, what's Jin talking about? Well, just think of it in a Kabbalistic way. Every man starts at Hod. I know. I know. Men are from Mars. Yeah. Okay. But men are really from Mercury, I think. But you pointed out a really interesting thing. They're really from both. So you're right. They are really from both. But they start at Mercury or they start at Hod and they have to get to Gevra. So that's kind of the idea. But that path, that upward path, especially on the tree, is blocked. So they can't go directly. So then it becomes this idea of like, how do you get there? So that's the challenge. But so the bachelorhood, you can see this in many Vedic deities, particularly Kartikeya, Murugan, Subramanya, he has many names, Kumara. He is a bachelor sometimes because that contains his tantric nature, which is secret. So that's the same as for monks, is that the bachelorhood can actually get them into Gevra, but it's a different model, right? It's a different system, slightly different. The path is different. So anyways, I just want to point that out because it's very interesting with what you're saying.
Yeah, and bouncing off that, I mean, from an astrological remediation point of view, which is kind of similar to talking about the tree, when you've got as much Venus in your chart as I do and afflicted and in a dark house, The prescription is actually to take a diet from Venus. If Venus is too strong, you need to take a diet from Venusian activities to better get a handle and grip on that area of life. So that actually fits being a quote unquote monk. But
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I'm sorry, John. Go ahead.
I was just going to add, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be forever, but there is a situation, there is a astrological situation to remedy, and the cure is such can be for some people being single.
Well, I just want to jump off something you said that was really interesting, and I apologize for cutting you off. But you could say that what you study, because I'm not an astrologer, I don't pretend to be in any way. I'm the first to say I'm not an astrologer, but I understand tantric astrology. Tantric astrology is very similar to Yetziradic astrology. So you're very astute in saying that, yes, to study the tree is to study astrology. Yes, 100%. You just have to be aware of, like, astrology is what density. You and I have talked a lot about this, and I've made many jokes about this, but many astrologers, they believe that the grahas, or the planets, are actually the highest forces in the world. They kind of transpose the the sort of markers on the map for the map itself. I don't know, just something interesting.
No, absolutely. I mean, it basically looks like we're in, to use the popular parlance, some kind of simulation, and the planets. I mean, there seems to be intelligence associated with them or whatever, but they appear to be in some way the mechanics or the gears or wheels of the giant machine, or at least they indicate what's going on in that sense. But they're not the goal, or they're not the target, or the source that we're trying to, I guess, go up the tree in the Kabbalah sense, or but they're not the goal of any kind of practice.
Exactly, well said. Because you could say that cosmological time, like the time that you study, the kind of clock that you study, as you compared it to, that ends in Binah, or ends in Saturn. Saturn is the anchor that holds the world clock. And then the outer three it's kind of different. Maybe you could say that's a lock. Maybe you could say it's a key. Maybe you could say it's both. Maybe you could say it's a turning mechanism, something like that. I tend to go away from, I don't know if you and Matt are conspiring against me, but I tend to go away from both clockwork universe and simulation theory, simply because we can experience things to a degree. We can experience phenomena, and we can be blissful in our lives, however fleeting. So I would say that there are times where we are single pointed, sort of in the moment, like beyond time and space. And that doesn't just happen in meditation. So because there are those moments, I also believe that we have to just recognize that it's all empty. I know you're not surprised to hear me say any of this. You hear me say it pretty much or every day. But I just think, like, this fundamental idea that, yeah, it can be speculatively a clockwork. It can be speculatively a simulation. But really, we're going to bring it back in. I know you know, and I know you agree to a degree. I don't want to speak for you, but, you know.
Yeah. No, 100%. And the integral yoga take is that it's a simulation in the sense that it's not the ultimate reality, right? But that doesn't negate the physical universe. It doesn't exist. It's not one or the other. It's one inside the other, one being informed by the other. And the simulation, we'll call it more a game, in that you're trying to discover that I guess ultimate emptiness in the Buddhist take inside the fleeting and the material, and that it's hidden inside, and it's a process of spiritual evolution to basically reach that ultimate goal, whereby you essentially become the same as the creator, and that's something that the gods cannot do. They're in static worlds. They're stuck. If they want to actually go any higher, even though they live immeasurably better lives than human beings do, they also have to take human birth.
Yeah, we're in a special place. This is so fundamental what you said. Like I cannot stress how important what you just said is. I've said it like probably like 20, 30 episodes, maybe 40 episodes ago. But it's just it's so worth repeating, especially now. Like I mean in the time of like the numbering for this episode and the ones that are around it. Is that fundamentally human rebirth is the desirable rebirth. Yes, there's misery, there's suffering, there's sorrow, there's loss, there's sicko shit. But this is fundamentally how we move forward, if you want to think of it as climbing the tree, or just like karmically more free in the universe. This is our free time. So, and as you said so well, John, is that like the devas and the asuras, they are stuck. They are in dense worlds. They live for certain texts say 1,000 years. Some say other numbers, but we'll say 1,000 years. But their time is relative. It's very slow where they live. So, there can be many lifetimes and thousands of years maybe in the human world, and they're watching all of it, but they're still finite. And the whole thing for me, at least in a Buddhist view, is to be infinite, to be Diamond Thunder.
I think that's the goal in all forms of Dharma, at least as far as I know them. And just you reminded me that a few years back I had a dream that seemed to be showing a progression of different lifetimes. It was sort of showing them on a map, like bouncing from this spot to this spot to this spot in a kind of progression. But the sense was that and also showing like a tangled karmic thread from each life, kind of getting steadily more tangled and knotted. But the point is that in the perspective of that dream, it was basically like a video game where you can't. It's the most cool, exciting thing. You can't wait to respawn again and do it again. And I don't know if that's the most spiritual perspective or Jupiterian or whatever, but that was the perspective of that one dream. That it is in a way the game-like nature of life that we can't necessarily see when we're in the middle of it.
One thing you did say I think I interrupted you probably in the middle of your story and went on a different tangent, but something you were talking about was kind of like a path of rectification for this kind of forced experience, and then you were kind of had to look inward. That's a very Hasidic thing. I'm not talking about Judaism, I'm talking about Kabbalah, just for clarity for everyone listening. Okay. So that kind of like internality of reflection, like seeing yourself for who you are, that's Hesed. But also having love for the things outside of you. So knowing that like I have to fix this in myself so then I can bring it to the outside world through my lived example, not through, it's not through your domination of the people around you. It's through your like lived example, and also I know this is gonna be a little tantric and people are going to be like, but I think you'll find this interesting, is that like in Yandro practice for Vajrasattva. So I'm just relaying a tantric example, obviously. But the idea is that through those Vajrasattva practices, that can take you all the way. That preliminary practice can take you all the way. So if you get really good at it and you keep doing it and you keep, you're stainless all the time, then things around you start to disaggregate their karma. Like you said, your teacher, one of the teachings is that the teacher himself will help disaggregate your karma. Well, that's a very Jupiterian thing. That's kind of the whole idea of Jupiter at the higher, you could say at the more Kabbalistic, Sephardic densities, like green Tara. That's exactly what she does. She de-densifies, de-aggregates. So I just thought that's really beautiful and really interesting.
But then even the guru is only is the representative of, whatever you want to call the God or the infinite light or whatever, luminous emptiness. The guru is ultimately just a servant or a vehicle, an instrument for that. And I was just reading my teacher the other day saying how in one case he couldn't help somebody with cancer because of he listed 3 different karmic reasons why he was unable to help. But one of them is one of those reasons will be, does God want him to help? He doesn't do anything of his own volition. It's only at the behest of that universal principle or the creator or whatever.
Something Casey also believed, isn't it?
Yeah. Casey also would describe, I think it's kind of a Platonic idea of there being planetary spheres. The soul travels down through and then back up through, to take incarnation. That sounded awfully similar to a couple in the tree.
That's what it is. That's what it is. It's just it's a Judaification of a Platonic idea. Although you could also argue that they wrote it down first. It depends, right? It's just like it's speculative, right? You have to always say that because we don't quite know. We know where it was. We know it was in like 2nd century AD in Babylon. We know that there was these kind of like proto-Aristotelian people, or like they were bringing in this kind of Aristotelian dialectic to change the tree. I guess it was more of a sphere or like a circle, maybe a wheel. Maybe that's a very dharmic way to think of it. But someone had sort of transformed it into more of an X and Y axis. So the whole idea in philosophy of religion is that if you map out God with negative quality, he will take on negative quality. And any quality beyond ineffable cannot fully contain what God is. So everything then is kind of a husk or like at least a vessel. So no, I think it's very similar to this idea, and that's how you would even you could even map it. You could even map it very easily. That Binah Venus sort of interchange, that would be where you would come back into reincarnation. Not necessarily rebirth, but reincarnation. If you think of like a more Hindu dharmic, quote unquote, samsaric cycle, that's where it would be. And then the outer 3 would sort of be more Buddhist, more free, open universe ideas.
Just reminding me that Edgar Casey didn't make too many prophecies, but the few that he did, one of them is war in the Middle East, which we're literally seeing right now. There were others about earth changes, which we're not sure if we've seen that. And then another thing that he predicted was a new world religion forming in Russia. It would basically be like the same principles as Christianity, and that's Russia's always been. Russia seems the Russian chart or the Russian nation seems tuned to the Saturn-Neptune cycle. You had the original Bolshevik Revolution of Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and then the death of Stalin, and then the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the USSR. And then what's coming next, we don't know. But there is this Edgar Casey prophecy hanging out there that at some point maybe some new faith or spiritual movement is going to emerge out of Russia.
Oh, I mean, it's definitely started. I don't think you'll be surprised to hear me say this. I agree with him, 100%. Russia is the land of weird Christianity. Orthodoxy, Kabbalah, it's all the same.
And another point he made was that basically Russia was going through a death and rebirth experience with World War II and communism, and so it's kind of out of that sort of complete renewal and rebirth that something new is going to emerge. We haven't seen yet. But,
well, maybe a more the thing is, if you have a more Central Asianist kind of worldview, or like you place the world island, at least in some turnings or some cycles, because it changes, right? We've talked about this many times. Certain things in the Leela, they don't correspond one-to-one. So you kind of have to remake it, reforge it. So, but the original turnings, you could say, Jambu-Vipa, broadly Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, where Nepal is, like all the way down there and then all the way up. But like huge swaths of Russia, Siberia particularly, and also Lake Baikal. like Baikal is a very important place, like just a extremely mystical, multi-faith, convergent, breakthroughs in science, many things. It's just extremely important place. Anyway,
Is this similar to the concept of civilization turning east?
so I think it is. I think it is in a way, because you can say that from that first turning, or from that kind of world island, um, you're saying that that is the world island ontologically for at least a time. So from there, everything kind of dispersed and spread outwards. So you have these different expressions of, maybe you could say, perennial ideas. I'm not saying a perennial system or I'm a perennialist. I'm saying there are perennial ideas, but then there's also primordial ideas, not just primordial truth, but maybe primordial ideas of the cosmos spreading out from there. And then what forms is these kind of like Atlantean, Hyperborean civilizations that I don't know if they compete or not. Like, do we really know? Like, yes, we have people like Casey who will talk about it. We have like certain classical accounts, but we don't know. So it's all speculative. But I kind of think that like everything about this is about like a misunderstanding of the tree. It's like people's preferred systems, and they become fixed on it. And I'm not talking about the superficial religion, although that's interesting, of course, to look at the differences in the, in the superficial canon or the exterior canon. But I think what we're talking about is like more esoterica. I don't know. This might be a little wild for you, John, but I think this is honestly what I think. And I think that, so what Casey's saying essentially does make sense to me. And it also makes sense to me in terms of his kind of Atlantean ideas. And I know that you've heard me speak a little bit about like Otsatlan and like Turtle Island being kind of like this third way component, or maybe like this third territory that is like an unexplored idea as a potential location. I don't know. Sorry.
No problem. But don't apologize. You just reminded me. So the civilization moves west. It's an idea that I found in some writings of Shiro Bindo. So if you think about it, you've got, say, you can start from the Middle East, and Iran, the Islamic culture, whatever. Then it goes to Europe. Then it goes to England. Then it goes to America. Now it's still going west. We're now at, I guess, touching the eastern edge of Russia and China and Asia generally. So that's, I guess, that's one way you can map that idea, which seems to go back at least 1,000 years anyway.
Well, that would make a lot of sense in a Buddhist dharmic view, because the wheel is conceptual, so it moves both ways. You can say that. It also moves and it's omnidirectional. So it's about our view, our perception. That's how it moves. It's more based on that. But if people are fixed in their view, again, so yes, I agree. Sure, culture can move west. But I also know, just from my own background, just having like that kind of area studies analysis, that a lot of the Arabic quote unquote Enlightenment materials were actually from Central and South Asia and China and other places.
Yeah.
And they were great synthesizers. I'm not saying that the Mughalized Indians who synthesized a lot of those like Proto-Arabic later magical texts weren't doing something really interesting. Of course they were. But they were also drawing from, I think you know this, that I would say this, is that of course they're drawing from Tantra. The Sufis are drawing from Tantra. Like a lot of what gets miscategorized as Arabic material is actually a little more Himalayan, I would say, in its scope. Of course, it becomes Arabized.
I mean, even the Casey material says that Jesus went to India. I'm not sure about the Tibet; that might be a different book, but definitely went to India to study. Like the things were brought to the Middle East from India. And of course, there was a two-way relationship to some extent, but
well, the Cochin Jews, right?
Yeah.
And then you have in Afghanistan was Gandhara, so you would have had there was a Judean there was a Judean population actually in Afghanistan at that time. So it's really interesting, and it's totally plausible. I mean, it's on the Silk Road, like a proto
Yeah,
Silk Road, but it's on that first, like, that Phoenician trail, if you want to call it that.
yeah, and we already know at this point that Hellenistic astrology and Vedic or Indian astrology were talking back at the time of Alexander because of his, sort of linking of the two worlds with his temporary conquests back in, what was it, 300 and something BC.
No, that's a really interesting point, John, and I'm sorry I derailed you from telling your story, but I think it was an interesting detour. But we can go back to that, or we can talk about more about Casey. So I'll give you a crossroads.
Gee, I don't know. I'm almost lost for words temporarily. What's really interesting about, I guess, my story is that before the teacher died, somebody asked him, "What's going to happen to this, movement or this meditation center after you die?" And he said, "Once I go, the meditation center will no longer be my center; it'll be God's center." And he also made a prediction several times that you people will try to start a religion, but I don't want that, so it will fail. And anyway, I mention it because there just seems to be another parallel about it being the end of kind of monastic living and monasteries and spiritual communities that are shut away from the world. Because even in this little, my little example, it's like, well, basically the monastery gates are open, so to speak, and it's time for spirituality to be practiced in the world. Although that obviously always was the philosophy, but even in that sense, there's not supposed to be a persisting, physical vehicle as such.
I agree. Aeon of the Magi. It's the time. It's like the Theurgy is now. You could even say, like, yeah, we should all be the Quicksilver Surfer. I 100% believe it. I think it's now. I think, like, I didn't. You know this, John. I didn't just. It wasn't just something that I thought of and was like, this will be fucking cool. This will get me clicks. Definitely not. People have a hard time with it. I get it. I'm probably not the best vehicle for it. I try and make it amusing and interesting, and all the co-hosts contribute greatly to it. But I do also believe it. So, like, I'll say these things and people can laugh, and that's fine. But really, I do believe it. So I agree 100% with what you're saying, and it also goes to that Saturn and Neptune thing. Institutions cannot contain what is essentially empty. That's a you could say that's a dharma. That's the obviously that's the primordial truth in Dharma. So it makes sense, but we also can't exist in sort of the smoke that arises in destruction, which is kind of dreamlike and also delusional. So there has to be a secret third thing.
And that reminds me, another thing the teacher said just very past was essentially that it's darkest before the dawn, but there is, to paraphrase, what looks like a golden age coming. It won't be next year or the year after, but very soon. And that's 18 years ago now, and it really does starting to look like we're on the threshold of a new age or a new aeon potential.
John, some of my ideas on what the new aeon is, but I'd love to hear some of yours. So why don't we talk about that?
Well, I mean, I can only go on what the teacher said, but they're not my ideas, and that, I mean, the end of the Kali Yuga as such is not even one teacher's idea. That's, we don't know where that came from, but it's very ancient. But essentially, it looks like a giant turning of the galactic wheel as such. The precession, the 26,000 year cycle. It looks like we're which the Kali Yuga is a low point, and it looks like that's coming to an end. And that was certainly the prediction of a number of teachers, including mine, was that we're right on the edge of some kind of more peaceful, end of war, beginning of world oneness kind of age. And this is Casey as well. Casey would say things like this. But I mean, I guess the point was, it's it's darkest before the dawn, and that's said to happen when aeons or ages are changing. There's a transition period that can be very incredibly chaotic.
So I agree with this 100%. Actually, I'm sure that you probably knew that, but so for me, it's just a question of like how good is your formulation of the aeonic cycles in the tantric material? Because the tantras do lay it out a little easier. Like if you're trying to go off like the Vedic cycles, like we haven't used those in thousands of years.
Yeah, we don't
So
even
to
know how to calculate
reproduce,
those.
that's exactly right. We can't even calculate those kind of epochs in time. So the tantric cycles are much smaller, 60, 70, and 80-year cycles, depending on the text. But what if each text and each kind of cycle, they're not the antithesis of each other? They actually can build the map before you. So that's how I treated it. And so I said, this is what it is. So you're 100% correct that it's not my idea. It's not any particular teacher's idea. It's simply looking at the text and saying, this is already rectified in this text, but we also have to understand it in deeper layers of meaning. And we also can't take it super literally. Like you can't take it millenarian literally. But also I agree with what you're saying that we are moving into a completely new cycle. It will be a new thing because we are all connected. We have, well, one of the ideas of the key words for the new aeon is ipsos. Not my idea, but one idea. We are connected through ipsos on the internet. And every time we connect on Fridays. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. There's another thing from Casey that this new age will be I don't know, inaugurated or marked, but one of the things that will happen around this time is that three halls of record, three buried chambers from Atlantis exist and will be found around, when the time is right, when the world is ready to change ages. And I'm not sure if you noticed in the news in the last few months, but there've been some huge discoveries between the pyramids in Giza. Exactly where Casey said one of these chambers was buried, and the discoveries were announced. So they're using synthetic aperture radar, which is a satellite-based acoustic scanning technique, essentially. And the discoveries were announced with the ingress of first Neptune and then Saturn into that 0 degrees Aries point. So that's another potential indication of what could be to come with this reset or new beginning at the 0 degrees of the world zodiac.
So just for the normies, and not that a normie followed us through this whole journey of like an hour, but we're still going. So it's no turn off. We're still going. Can you explain this idea of the Lagna and the Nakshatra? Because I think both of those ideas are at interplay at the 0 degrees. You can correct me if I'm wrong. That's totally fine. I won't chastise you in any way. But just explain what those are and why you could say that this is. I mean, I'll add obviously to the end, but explain why you think that this is like a marker of the aeonic cycle, as if the aeon was a human or the world was a human, like a birth.
So I'm perhaps distinct from Lagna as in the first house, or yes, Lagna is the first house. Yeah, so the zodiac, the 12 signs, the originally from Greece zodiac, begins with Aries. That's the first sign, and so symbolically, any event that happens at 0 degrees of Aries could be said. I mean, this is a theory. We don't have a lot of evidence to go on, but could be said symbolically to represent the beginning point for the entire world. Like when you're not using a birth chart in some particular location, the 0 point for the entire world is 0 degrees Aries. And so that's where we get the idea that things happening at that point could be, and also that's used for measuring years and so solar returns for the different locations. It's called the Aries ingress when the sun hits 0 degrees Aries. So it seems to be a significant point. It's the beginning of the zodiac, and it's a way that you can forecast for the year ahead for a country, a person, and even the entire world, we think.
Well, the world is a burning girl, so it completely makes sense to me. No, thank you, John. I'm sorry I put you on the spot a little bit for that. I should have asked you probably before, but I think it's important because I think that like astrology is not like how it is on Twitter. Like it just isn't. I think you do a great job, and I think obviously our friend of the show, Joe Tier Astrology, he also does a great job. But I do find it challenging to take with any seriousness most of the astrological work done on Twitter. I'm just being honest. I'm not being
No, no,
cantankerous or
100%.
mercurial or
100%.
you know.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's I don't any serious astrologer. I don't think any serious astrologer would claim that astrology at this point in time is a complete art or a complete science. We don't seem to have all of it. It seems to come from somewhere in the past that's not yet been recovered, and in fact, that's essentially what the casing material seems to be indicating: is that these halls of records that have been deliberately buried and hidden from the time of Atlantis will contain that kind of information. They've put away the original spiritual and material history of the earth and things like astrology in a place to sort of archive it for future civilization.
So did he say that they were physical records or like just Akashic records?
Well, we don't actually know, but they're physical chambers. We don't know what's in them, but that's sort of the hint that it has the sort of the true history of this world and of mankind and our place in the universe. Like,
I mean, that is very interesting. It is very interesting. I don't know if I totally am there, but I'm like I'm in flux there. Like I'm dancing there.
And he gave there were three locations, three different halls and three locations. One is it was quite specific with one. He said it's like 100 or 200 feet beneath one of the paws of the Sphinx, and then there's one in the Yucatan in Mexico, and there's one beneath in the Caribbean near Bimini under the waves. And they're all identical. They've all got identical records, but the one beneath ground readings already show a buried chamber in that location beneath the paw of the Sphinx, but they can't get permission to look. They've known that since I think it was Anthony West's documentary in the mid-90s, maybe with Graham Hancock. There's a whole thing about they did the readings and they could see the chamber there, but they can't get down there. They can't get permission to search and dig.
So I have a love-hate relationship with Graham Hancock simply because I read those books and I thought they were like, wow, this is like amazing. But then I have certain questions about like his dating, and it's not any kind of like normie archaeology questions. It's more that there are some really interesting late tantric sites in the same places that some of the places that he goes. And I just would wonder, like, why does he? This is kind of a side tangent. Maybe it's unimportant, but I just feel like, well, okay, so Indonesia. So there's a temple that is basically like the tantric. Like, if you're going to build a Solomon's temple, they basically built it out of volcanic stone. So very Diamond Thunder right there. And they actually, it receives lightning strikes. That was the whole idea, was the king would sit under these bell shapes and receive like a lightning strike. So what I'm saying is that I wonder why he avoids these kind of like much more materially rich sites, and he picks like a place in the jungle in Indonesia that is just like basically bricks.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I actually never got past that episode in the latest series.
Anyways, I'm sorry for that. A side tangent. But no, I agree. Like the early material of Grams is great. And I think that with Bimini and that place in Japan, which I always forget the name of.
Yeah,
I think he actually.
You get the underwater sort of like giant structures, right? That kind of coral.
Yes. And in Micronesia as well.
Yes.
I think that there's also the underground pyramids there. And also there is an above water temple who was supposedly built by a great sorcerer. right? And that's what he always would say is like it's built by a great sorcerer, and he was able to levitate the bricks. And this is like a later temple. It's not like 20,000 years ago. But it's like 6th, 7th, maybe 8th century. But it's on like this one of those like Micronesian islands, and it's like it's almost Hindu in its sort of quality. So it's a very interesting. I think he did a lot of great work on these kind of like underwater temples and underwater structures that we talk about very much now in alternative history.
Yeah, and the Casey material also kind of suggests that there was some sort of levitation going on for the bricks, or the giant stones. He doesn't give specifics, but something like that was going on. I'm not sure if it was occult, technological, but there was some. It was anti-gravity, but yeah, that sinks.
Well, Randall Carlson really believes it's anti-gravity. I mean, you can take it for what you want, but like there are people that are like very actively talking about like this anti-gravity or the Tesla energy. Whether that bears fruition or not, I mean, I don't know, but I think that I'm open.
I mean, that's a changing of ages, if such a thing is occurring, suggests that there are and also just Pluto and Aquarius and Uranus and Gemini, although that's a smaller cycle, but it looks like we're about to accelerate technologically, and multiple teachers and psychic and stuff are saying similar things. I mean, I think we all feel it. It's not even, you don't have to be psychic to see how fast these things are traveling now.
Well, that's really, that's the perfect way to describe it, is that it is the age of Aquarius, but we don't have to frame it as dystopian, and we don't have to frame it as like inherently utopian. Like we still have to guide, craft, and perhaps nurture the the world as it comes into form. So
Yeah.
I think that's true. So I obviously we have that speculative idea, aether punk, and we're talking about this exact thing, the merger of magic and technology, and what that would look like, and what the aesthetics are, and what the sort of nature of that is politically. Always speculative, of course, but it's a very interesting because it is very aeonic in a way. And I probably did it intentionally, like very consciously, but I think I didn't realize like how much it was going to speak to like earlier ideas I had on the aeonic shift.
That's another thing about changing ages, is that it's said by many people to be a juncture, sort of in a human in a spiritual evolutionary sense, and that technology is moving so fast that we perhaps need to evolve spiritually to keep up, or else I mean, this is not a radical idea. We're on the verge of destroying ourselves if it gets too out of sync. Like we need to evolve as a species and as spiritual beings to be able to use these advancing technologies in a non-destructive way. And that's I mean, Casey would say that was the lesson of Atlantis, where they had extremes and occult and material powers, but not wisdom and not spiritual. Well, they fell spiritually. They basically became deeply corrupted and materialistic, and devolved into human sacrifice, and so just it ended up destroying their civilization, even though they were extremely advanced technologically. So they were said to be.
Well, I want to talk about this for a second. This idea of like human sacrifice and why things fall into a transgressive or antinomian, maybe that's a better word, antinomian nature. It inherently comes from dualism. So if I could say anything about the aeonic shift, I personally believe it's non-dual. Now, you don't have to co-sign this, John. It's just an idea that I have, is that maybe it is the full expression of like Manjushri or the non-dual gnosis. And obviously I'm not taking that strictly from my own, but like another, you could say, prophet or thinker, Jumipam Rinpoche, he also said this. He also talked about the aeonic shift. He talked about it more in Kala Chakra terms. But he also talked about the aeon of the daughter. And he also talked about this kind of like love as the cause of knowledge idea through his primary Dakini practice, who was Kurukula. So I feel like a lot of people are converging, you could say like the point of the five-petaled lotus. They're all converging on complementary ideas rather than they're not inherently contradicting, right? They're complementary.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, working backwards, if there is an aeonic shift coming, then one would see it materializing or manifesting in these different these different teachers are all tuning into the same thing, the same wave that's coming, so to speak.
So okay, so tell me about this coming aeon, John, in your opinion. Are you optimistic?
I mean, I'm optimistic ultimately because my teacher was optimistic, but also, I mean, I've seen how much the world has changed these 30 years of being a quote unquote monk. Meditation was in the West, I should add, was incredibly unusual, weird, strange thing to do to an extent 30 years ago, and now it's totally commonplace. And my teacher even made a prediction of that as well. He said that in the 70s, he said you'll see in 50 years how much teaching people to meditate and giving free meditation classes will actually lead to a change in the world. And here we are. We're at that time right now where meditation apps are number one in the iPhone app store, and every second person is meditating. Maybe not successfully, or maybe not every day, but it's commonplace. And then, I mean, I don't know about you, but if you look back at old movies and old photos and stuff, does it sometimes seems like reality was denser? There's a heaviness. If you look at the boomers when they were young, everything looks kind of heavier and grosser, like I don't know, like the consciousness is slowly raising or something in the world.
Well, I believe that the consciousness is raising in the world for sure. And I agree with you that there's a density, equality. I think that you see this in light. And I think people complain about it in terms of cinema. So they look at like how certain countries are depicted. And I'm not saying they don't use particular filters, but there is qualities of light that differ in certain places. So I think that that's also part of it, is like you see a kind of lifting of densities in particular places. I'm not tying it to any, racial or, anything like that. I'm just saying you do see a lifting because you can sort of tell that there's a Kabbalistic, a kino quality of light in photography in certain places compared to others. As someone who's a big fan of archival sort of religious photography, I have noticed exactly what you're saying. Like there's a denser, a more nature seems much darker. The greens seem much darker. It seems much stronger. And in my opinion, things are getting brighter. Things are getting more luminous. And I do think that I know this sounds so weird, but I do think that, and I see that personally.
And that's literally that's the theory, a changing of the ages, is that the density literally is lightening, that the consciousness is rising, that for whatever reason, we don't know the astrology really, or it's lost in the mists of time and needs to be recovered, but there seem to be these cycles where the kind of consciousness or the density goes up and down. And if we are lifting up out of the so-called Kali Yuga, which is the low point, then you would expect to see a kind of lightening, and also in mind and thought, and I mean, also I remember in the early days of meditating, there used to be sort of a bigger difference between, say, you do meditation, there'd be a sort of sense of light and brightness, whatever, and the rest of the world would seem kind of very dull and grim. And that difference between meditation time and on the cushion and the world around isn't so stark anymore. I don't know. It's totally 100% subjective, but it just feels like there's, in a very general woo-woo way, there's more light out there.
No, I agree. The whole point of meditation, at least from like my Buddhist perspective, is like self-luminosity, right?
Mm.
So it would make sense then. I'm not saying everyone's successfully doing it, but like people who are successfully doing it, of course, things around them will become, by their nature, more self-luminous. Like we say that for mantra practice. So if I go outside and do Hayagriva, like say 18 rotations. So that's almost 2,000 mantras. Okay. That's supposed to it's supposed to also be for the benefit of the land, benefit of the land protectors, benefit for the yakshas, benefit for the trees, benefit for the plants, benefit for the birds, benefit for the insects, the soil, and the just general atmosphere. So like J. David Osborne, who came on the show, he discussed like American Shinto, as he called it. And so Buddhism is, as you know, John, because you and I discussed it, is poised to also like sort of be a vehicle for these same things. And so, but that's what mantra is. That's why I always place that emphasis on the word and like being able to speak like we're doing right now. So,
Very well put. Yeah, I mean, but of course, who knows really, right? I mean, the prophecies are fairly sparse. They suggest an upwards track, a rising cycle, but I mean, it's still speculation, really. We don't have the astrological tools to be absolutely certain. Although there's his name is Bebu Dev Misra. He's been on Dan Waite's podcast a number of times. He thinks the Kali Yuga officially ended. I think it was March 26, 2025, like 2 months ago. So I don't know. I don't know how he's calculated that, but he's written a whole book, and based on both Vedic and Greek texts and actually cultures all around the world to try and make the argument that we have just now come out of the Kali Yuga based on his calculations.
well, I agree with Dan and disagree with him at the same time. So I agree that we entered the year of the new Aeon this year. I say Chinese New Year, Lunar's New Year. That was like sort of my thinking. If you follow Kala Chakra, the Tantra, like the astrological cycle, that will make sense. And if you'll note, the World Buddhist Forum, the sixth World Buddhist Forum, was held in China during that exact same period. So that's personally what I think. So I think that makes a lot of sense. But I also think that we actually entered into another Kalpa in the 1700s. So we aren't coming directly from the Kali Yuga. We had it like an interstitial. I speculatively called it like Aeon of the Dragon. If you want to think of it as colors of the goddess, you could say Kali Yuga, as you know, John, I'm just saying this for people listening, is not inherently linked to the goddess Kali, but you can use Kali as a conceptual marker. So Kali is blue-black, the darkest quality blue-black. So you could say that that's Kali Yuga. But then in the 1700s, we kind of moved into a reddening, a rubedo. So we went from Negrito, the blackening, into the rubedo, the reddening. But there has to be like a little bit of an interstitial period to kind of get there, the greening, chrysopia. So like the transformation from, you could say, Kali into Tara. So we kind of had to realize this higher consciousness, this kind of liberated way of thinking of the world, not so rooted on Malkuth, but like on Malkuth and comfortable with it, like able to look up at Kether and like know our place in the universe and not be either kowtowed or humbled by it, I guess. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but there is something. Yeah, I think that's sort of correct. So I think that happened. I think we kind of have, if you want to say that America represents a kind of element of that, I personally think it does, at least in the sort of founding mythologies and the Constitution.
Yeah, and there was that was one of the last big outer planet lineups. That was Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune formed a grand trine in the mid 1700s, just before the American Revolution and then the French Revolution.
Well, it makes sense, right? Especially how people in sort of the more, you could say, left-hand path magical traditions, they understand, or magical orders, they understand Uranus is to be very transgressive, very radical. And of course, it is those things as well. But if you understand in a more tantric way, you can also see it as processes of consciousness rather than like living outward in the world. Like it doesn't have to be there, but obviously it can manifest there. But like those kind of things that the raging of the fire and the water together can sort of produce something electric, can produce something very interesting. But it's really difficult to control.
Yeah, sorry. And
no, don't
Uranus and electricity were both discovered at that point too. And there's
that
a
makes
theory.
sense.
There's a theory, I think, from Richard Tarnas, that the discovery of each outer planet then sort of led to an age of about 100 years that was kind of ruled or expressed that planet. And so you have an age of revolution for 100 years from the discovery of Uranus, and then an age of Neptune in the 1900s. So 1800s, and that you have photography and the movies and even the art of propaganda all coming about in that period. And then we're now from about 1930 in an age of Pluto, and where we're seeing extremes and extremism, the nuclear weapons, the kind of the Plutonic the Plutonic contradictions and upheavals have marked this last 100 years, which is and again we're seeing nuclear weapons in the headlines, and according to that principle anyway, it's not set in stone, but we're nearing the end of that age of Pluto, if that is such a thing, around about 2030.
Well, isn't it interesting, John, that in Kabbalah, death, which is sometimes, at least in the tree that I prefer, is linked to Pluto. One of the resolutions of that Sephira is actually non-dual consciousness, non-dual wisdom. So maybe, I know that we won't maybe discuss what I think the origin of those weapons are this time, but I do want to ask you a couple questions, and they're not gotchas. They're just I'm just curious. So what drew you into what I was talking about in the Aeonic kind of thinking I was doing? Like what about it was like, this is actually interesting or worthwhile? If you think that, and if you don't think that, you can say that's okay. I'll take it. But what did you find like relatable or interesting about it? Just because I'm curious. I've never heard anyone say like what. I've never really had like substantive feedback. So I guess I'm asking you. I'm asking you to be a teacher of this time.
I mean, really, there's so many prophecies. There's and also, I have the odd dream of the future and so forth. And so just basically to come across another person who seemed to be identifying a similar trend that I was trying to identify or seeing, that was basically the first thing that stood out about your work.
That was a very diplomatic, I would say almost UN-esque answer. But no, I appreciate it though. No, I sincerely do. I don't know if it was totally me doing that thinking. Like, I don't know if that was like 100% me. It's not really like how I used to think of the world, to be honest with you. I'm just being honest. But I think that something changed in me just talking about it, like very openly, almost like I was very embarrassed, to be honest, right away. I was almost like humiliated. It was almost like they joke on Twitter, like humiliation fetish, but it wasn't a fetish because I didn't really want to do it, but I just almost felt compelled to. And I was also like, I actually want to do something with this. I actually have this idea. It could be so generative. It could be really interesting. So for me, I'm such a in my mind sort of cerebral person that there's a lot outside of it that I don't know. So
I mean, it's the nature of being a quote unquote prophet, right? I mean, look at Noah, one of the original prophets,
in big trouble,
which is potentially was the sinking of Atlantis, and there he was building his ark, getting ridiculed, looking like a fool until at the very last minute he wasn't. But you kind of got to throw yourself out there a little bit to talk speculatively about the future, especially when almost nobody else has got their eye on it or has a sense for it.
Well, that's the problem, is that people are focused on like a millenarianism. They're focused on like the end of times. They're not really understanding like apocalypse is revelation, meaning that it really just happens in your mind. It's not something that's fixed in time. So let's shift with the aeons. That's what I think. I think that's the most useful framework that you can really relate to people if you're going to introduce them to an aeonic thinking, which is more axial, but it's also more cyclical, more it's more flexible. So it's for certain people, it will inevitably be very difficult to break out of that Saturnian kind of more clockwork universe thinking. But once they are able to do it, I think that they will see some of the things that not just me, and I'm not a prophet, that John was totally just kidding. But and I've never referred to myself as such. I just want to be clear. But jokingly, I will sometimes say that I run is a secret temple. Okay, so that's all. But no, I think once they do, they'll see that it actually bears fruit, like, or at least bears flowers. It'll at least it generates something, and they'll see like, oh, actually, there's this idea in magic, a fundamental component of magic that is Yod He Vav He. So why, if you have 4 quadrants of magic plus the Magi, why would you have a, like, it's not fixed to a 3, it's not fixed to like, 5 is a resolution to the 10. That's all I'll say about that. So it makes perfect sense for me, and it makes a lot of sense for astrology as well. And I just think that you can prove it in so many ways, and people are talking about it and have been talking about this for like several hundred years. And it's not some crazy conspiracy. It's not some like Age of Aquarius Esalen Institute. Like, who cares now? But I'm just saying it's not that as well. It's like it's materially different, and so just try and shift your thinking to be flexible.
Just one further little story on that. My teacher, at least, was signaling that the actual millennium, the year 2000, was inaugurating a shift, and then basically, if you use the triplicity, the conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn, every 20 years they conjoin, and it goes through in cycles of 200 years in a different element. So it was 200 years of Earth signs up until 1980 or 81, and then we switched to air, and that's when you start to get the rise of computers and microchips and all that kind of stuff, air-based technologies. And then there was a conjunction. It went back to Earth in the year 2000, and so this new age that was potentially starting actually reverted back to Earth, and suddenly you had wars for oil and all these kind of land grab type Earth sort of themes coming back, and almost like a step backwards, which is also what the planets did by their conjunction. But 2020 was the official start of 200 years of conjunctions and air signs, and that was actually at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So in a way, we're in a by Jupiter Saturn conjunctions, we are in an age of air for 200 years, starting from December 21st, 2020.
That's incredibly interesting, John, what you said about shifting back into an like a micro time of Earth sign. Because I was thinking about this exact thing. Like, so I position the Aeon of the Father to be like the prime Aeon, in the sense that starts us off on an Aeonic cycle, at least at the beginning. So we're saying the last turning. Okay, there's the Aeon of the Father, then it shifts to Aeon of the Mother. But there is also something primordial about the Mother. So perhaps before shifting all the way to a new Aeon, maybe the Aeon of the Sun, maybe it shifts back slightly. Maybe there's like a re-institutionalization of knowledge. If we look at history, this would also make sense.
Also, this is what all the planets do, especially the outer planets. They go their synodic cycle. The cycle around the sun, when viewed from Earth, is basically 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. with the outer planets all being all the planets from Jupiter out all spending about a third of the year in retrograde. So basically it's like reality. We go 2 steps forward, history progresses 2 steps forward, and then it takes a step back, then another 2 steps forward, based on astrological cycles at that basic level.
So wouldn't it be so much better? I don't know. You don't have to say if you think this is better, but I think it's better. Is that I think it would be so much better if people understood aeonic cycles, because you could actually act in accordance with them. That's not antithetical to the accordance of your free will, but it's also, you could say, in accordance maybe more with Dharma. And so I don't know. I like that.
No, 100%, and that's also why it's useful to know astrology, because you similarly see the weather, the astrological weather is kind of like, which is going to correlate to events in your life and the world. You can, if it's going to be sunny or if it's going to be rainy, you can plan for that.
So we'll close it here. John, please plug yourself. Plug anything you want to plug.
Thanks for having me on, Jim. And I'm starting to do readings by donation. People can find me on Twitter X at Space Answered. I'm starting the 3rd year of study with Austin Coppock, and I need to build up my mental database, my memory banks of practice readings. So I'm going to try out doing it by donation for a little while and see how that goes.
Amazing. That means money. Okay. By donation, John's being really polite, but pay him, please.
Cold hard cash, please.
Yeah, cold hard cash. Exactly.
Reading you like food or hear a